Okay, so I'm making a clay chuck on the potter's wheel. So to begin the chuck, you make sure you have enough clay for whatever form that you're wanting to trim. I don't know if you can see them, but here I have a hollow chuck. That's for long neck vases, long neck bottles. It's also good for very large bowls. On the one on the left, that one's a little bit smaller, meant for trimming like 8, honestly anywhere between about 6 and 20 ounces, depending on the shape and size of your cup. And each chuck has its own purpose. And so today I'm going to be making several chucks just for you guys. We had a request from Mackenzie, and I'm going to be demonstrating all the necessary aspects of what you need to do. Number one being, make sure that you properly center. Clay has a very distinct memory, and so because I need these chucks to be basically perfect, I need them to be perfectly round, perfectly flat on the base, perfectly even in the wall, and because of that, if I were to do any less centering than you see me doing, these chucks would degrade about roughly 10 times faster, and I've done some experiments in that. But when you throw the chuck correctly and you make sure that the internal structure of the clay that's moving in the same direction is all equal, then it has a much more long-lasting effect, and it also increases the density of those particles against one another. Or at least that's my version of it. Maybe 1 or 2 more times up and down, and then I'll start centering the core once it's mostly aligned. And as usual, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. Hey Maria, can you share the video on a group named Clay Buddies? That's the kind of movement in the core I'm looking for. Most important thing when you're attempting this type of centering, which I don't suggest until you've gotten used to the normal centering, eventually you receive a type of centering that is a full alignment of the vortex. Once that happens, any motion affects the entire piece of clay. And that's what's happening there, in case you're wondering. And remember, feel free to ask any questions. I know the way I do things is a little bit weird, and there is no bad question, so have at it. And now I'm going to test the core and see if it's where I want it to be. Not yet. Still has a little bit of resistance. I kind of just want to see, or want you guys to be able to see the actions from almost a first point perspective. That way, if you ever try to do this stuff, it will be a little bit easier to recreate for your body. Alright, that is a very strong core. It has its own movement now, and it really likes the way that it's feeling, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it into something. Awesome. So that's the softness that I'm looking for. imagine how much or how little pressure goes into doing that. And now this is the hardest part, making a choice. What kind of chuck would I like to make? I think because of this size, I'm going to go for a very long neck bottle chuck. Alright, so step number 1. I came up an inch above the wheelhead, brought in the wall, and now this is going to be my extra base. This is what's going to allow your chuck to remain spinning on the wheel without flying off due to your immense pressures from your trimming. And you need this extra stability to be able to hold aloft something that's going to be sitting up this tall. You want all of your weight to be on the base. The lower the center of gravity, the better, because as you press in multiple directions, that lower gravity keeps it from tipping over, which is very important when you're making these. Now, even though this is about almost an inch thick, I'm going down to a half an inch thick from the bottom to conserve clay. The strength of the base is the least of your worries. What you need is the strength of the outside rim, strength of your top rim, and then a descending strength all the way into the base, because all those pressures are going to be directed downward into the center. Remember, we took a lot of time centering here, and that's why the clay was moving so uniformly, because anything that is done to one piece is done to the rest. Okay, now this next portion is very important. I'm going to show you first what you don't want to do, and hopefully it doesn't affect my chuck. It's very likely that it might affect my chuck, but I'm going to do it anyway just so you guys can see what not to do, okay? Now, this goes against a lot of the ways things are taught, and I apologize about that. It's just about everything I do. It's very important that you do not try to turn the fingertips and lift up on the clay. I'm going to show you why you don't want to do that. It is the illusion of solidity that encourages that action. You believe you can get underneath it and then lift it up. Rather, what I'm going to be doing in the second demonstration is more like squeezing some type of liquid out of a tube. In so doing, when you do it the first way, which is what you don't want to do, you get two separate independent layers moving up along the wall and a small portion of upwards motion of the clay. But the important part is that if you lift up, when you get to the top, you're going to get these two little tiny layers that come up over the top. It's the equivalent of the volcano when you're centering. That's also why you don't want to try and lift upwards during the centering process. That's what creates your volcano. Instead, you want to press lightly, and as the clay moves past your fingers, you simply follow that clay, holding that pressure, just like squeezing water out of a tube or any kind of liquid out of a tube. Okay? And so here goes step number 1, which you don't want to do. This goes for all creations of cylinders. Okay, so I'm going to go into the interior and exterior. I'm then going to turn my fingers and lift upwards along the wall. And there it is. This very distinct look here. Okay? See, I don't know if you can see from your angle, but there's a layer here at the top, and on the interior there's also a second layer, as if you were trying to do a double-lidded jar. However, this is all liquid clay, and it's all liquid clay until that point right there. This is why you do not want to do that. It's two separate layers moving up along the wall. You can always tell by the deep grooves left behind the fingertips, and you can also tell by this distinct double wall at the top. You do not want to have that. That's how you're going to end up messing up your rims. So if I just continue that motion all the way to the top, this happens every time. Liquid clay, second layer of glaze or clay, just falls right off of the piece because it was moving independently. We do not want independent movement from our cylinder because this clay has a life of its own. We've cultivated that by giving it a vortex that it follows. And so when you act against that vortex, you're not going to get the movement that you want. So I'm just going to go ahead and even just cut that top off because it's mostly liquidy clay. Okay. So hopefully, like I said, this doesn't affect my chuck. I can already feel these tiny little layers of clay starting to accumulate on the rim. Hopefully my next motions will allow the clay to return to its original uniformity. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So I still felt a little layering happening, but that's okay. I think I'll be able to salvage this chuck. Okay, so I have a pretty decent height here, but it's just not tall enough for the type of bottle I want to make. It's been so long since I've given myself one of these chucks.